Welcome to the Positive Gene Podcast. My name is Sara Kavanaugh. This is a podcast empowering cancer previvors and survivors over our hereditary cancer risk. We're all in this together, and I'm so thankful for your support. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Positive Gene Podcast. This is your host, Sara Kavanaugh. Today, I'm talking with Aliza Friedlander, a BRCA1 positive previvor who made the decision to move forward with a preventative mastectomy on her own timeline after thoughtfully weighing the risk, emotions, and realities of living with a genetic mutation. She's now working with the Cancer Vaccine Coalition, the only nonprofit organization solely focused on raising money and awareness to accelerate cancer vaccine research to treat cancer, prevent recurrence in cancer survivors, and possibly prevent cancer in high-risk patient populations. And as a side note, this is very exciting for me because as a previvor myself, I am beyond thrilled that this research is moving forward. Aliza brings a unique perspective to this work. She is a former morning show producer and communications expert with a background in PR and marketing. She helps brands tell authentic stories and build real connections. And she's now using that storytelling expertise to have some of the most important conversations that we can have about the future of cancer treatment and prevention. And I'm so happy to be included in that conversation. So I'm excited for you to hear Aliza's perspective on prevention, communication, and the power of owning your own story, especially when that story can help others navigate their own health journeys. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, me too. All right, well, let's jump right in. You have been open about your BRCA1 positive journey and your decision to have a prophylactic bilateral mastectomy. So let's just hear in your words what that decision process maybe looked like for you emotionally and practically. And before I have you answer that, I want to recognize that a lot of folks that are listening to this show, maybe on the tipping point of making that decision themselves, or they've already made that decision and maybe they're still kind of wrestling with why they made the decision that they did. And so I really appreciate, another perspective from somebody who has been there and has even shared that story publicly.
Yeah, so we found out in my family that this genetic mutation was there back in 2013. So it was May 2013, right around when Angelina Jolie was talking about her story. It was getting a lot of coverage. My maternal grandmother had a second bout of breast cancer. So as the story goes, she was in the emergency room or the hospital getting treatment and stuff. And they were like, oh, we have this new genetic testing that you can do. It's a spit test, pretty easy, just spit in it. So she was like, okay, great, sure. Spit in it, comes back with this BRCA1 genetic mutation, which in 2013, as a layperson and the general public really didn't know a ton about what that meant. So here we are. I was young. I hadn't had children yet. I didn't have life insurance. We have no history of early onset breast cancer in our family. My grandmother got this genetic test result, called my mom, my aunt, my uncle, all of us, was like, you got to get tested. Still didn't really understand what any of this meant. And I just remember going through and watching my mom and my aunt and my uncle all got tested, and my younger sister actually got tested. And it was such a process. It was secretive. They had to do this spit test in a specific office that they had to send to a private lab in California. That was one of the only ones that was doing the testing at the moment. And then they had to wait, and then they got this back, and it was kind of like, okay, now you have to go through all of these drastic measures. Like my mother was not quite 60, was already postmenopausal. So it was like, you need to get all of your gynecological stuff taken out, and you have to do a mastectomy, and you have to do all of these drastic measures to reduce your risk of cancer. And I remember my mom and my aunt in December of 2013 both did the gynecological stuff, but nobody did the mastectomy or the breast side of things. Even my grandmother, who had a second bout of breast cancer, had only had a lumpectomy, or not only had a lumpectomy, but hadn't had a mastectomy. So I had no baseline for what a mastectomy even was. This felt so extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And as a young woman, an adult who was newly married, was starting to think about what I was going to do for my family, planning all of these things that I had in my head, it was a lot. And I am somebody who has a lot of anxiety that manifests around health already. I didn't know at that moment in time if the reward of knowing this information was worth the risk of triggering all of the severe anxiety that I know manifests in myself around health related issues. And I didn't know if I was going to do anything about it. My grandmother hadn't had a mastectomy. My mom hadn't had a mastectomy. We had no history of early onset breast cancer. There were still a lot of unknowns. So I did do the research. I talked to genetic counselors. I watched what my mom and my aunt had decided to do. I watched what my sister decided to do. And my sister, who's a couple years younger than me, actually did decide to get tested. So I was, just to put it in perspective for ages, 25. So 12 years ago. So I was 25. My sister was 22. So she did get tested. I did not get tested. And my sister went through like her decision-making process. My mom got tested. My aunt got tested. They were all three positive. My uncle was negative. And I made the decision with my husband and genetic counselors and my doctors that at that moment in time, I was not going to find out if I had this gene.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't. And it was really, at the time, I didn't realize, I think, what I was doing, what I was going through, the gravity of this situation. I do remember though, like I had called a few organizations and tried to get some information, and everybody was very quick to sort of jump down my throat and be like, what do you mean you're not getting tested? How can you not know? Of course you're going to, if you're positive, the only step forward is a prophylactic bilateral mastectomy and maybe a full hysterectomy. And I was like, whoa, hold the phones. Like, I haven't had children. I maybe want to breastfeed. I don't know if this is what I want to do. You're making me very anxious, and I'm already anxious. So I made this educated decision to not get tested at that moment in time. And I went along with my life. I had my kids and I breastfed and I continued to, do what my doctors recommended. I stayed in close contact with genetic counselors. I had meetings. I talked to people. I lived under the assumption that I probably did have this genetic mutation. However, I didn't do, personally, I didn't do any of the surveillance or stuff for the genetic mutation. Now, my sister, on the other hand, did. So she got tested and ended up, she did every 6 months, mammogram or MRI with contrast, transvaginal ultrasounds, all of that. That was her decision. That was her choice. I did not. Again, it was at a time where there was just so little information around it, and it was grounds to deny life insurance. I would not have been able to do IVF even if I had wanted to, I don't think, to remove the gene. Now I know now people are starting to do that, and I know some people who have done that. That wasn't even an option when this had come out. So that was the choice that I made, and so I did not get tested at that point in time.
I do want to speak to the point that you made. You used the word, I made an educated decision. And you did the due diligence. You took the time. And like you said, even when, as you were in your early 20s and didn't understand the gravity of the situation, you really took your time with it. And I think that's something that I like to always remind people about. You can take your time. You are going to get pressured sometimes. And still today, 12 years later, it does happen. And I love that you framed it that way, that you made an educated decision or an informed decision and took your time with it.
I was just going to add too, again, because this is, my journey and path, and, I don't want to ever give medical advice, but I think gathering all of the information and then deciding what works best for you, even the genetic counselors and my OBGYN were like, you know what? Based on your family history, based on what we're seeing, based on the presentation of this, we feel comfortable with you going down this path and this direction if this is the choice that you want to make at this moment in time. However, at any given moment, we may give alternate recommendations or alternate suggestions based on what happens or what we see or what goes on. And so I did stay very close to genetic counselors and always had somebody in my back pocket that every couple of years I did check in with and said, okay, this is what's shifted, this is what's changed, this is what we're seeing now. I was very close with my OBGYN who I trusted fully. I like to say that I didn't get tested and I kind of went along the path of my life, but this always was in the back of my head. And this was always, even at that early stage, something that I always had in my mind. And my ultimate thought and process was I was going to go through my childbearing years and sort of have my children, breastfeed if it worked for me, get through that phase and stage of my life, and then get tested and figure out what the next steps were in that journey.
So you've spent the first part of your career as a journalist and wrote this story where you described kind of following that route that, just as you described, fit your circumstances and the values that are important to you and your family. Maybe go into a little bit deeper on how you came to that decision and then ultimately what led you to get the double mastectomy.
Yeah. Again, I came to that decision just because of the anxiety that I know is within myself for health related things. And, from my understanding, we have pretty good surveillance for breast cancer and that side of things. I was more concerned, or not more concerned, but I was very concerned about the ovarian side of things because the surveillance is still in progress and we're still working towards that. And so doctors told me that, as you're looking, you might go down these rabbit holes of false positives, false negatives for all of this type of surveillance. And I just didn't know if mentally I could handle that at that moment and in that period of time. And I knew I wasn't going to do anything prophylactically about it. I wasn't going to get rid of my ovaries, uterus, all of that. I had not had children. I wasn't going to have a mastectomy. My grandmother had had 2 round bouts of breast cancer, still had her breasts. My mom had not had a mastectomy. Nobody in my family had had a mastectomy. This wasn't something that was, this deep-seated family history of early onset breast cancer, lots of loss. Sometimes you hear those stories. That's not what we were experiencing. We found this genetic mutation on a serious fluke. And it just so happened that my grandmother was going through breast cancer treatment simultaneously, again, with Angelina Jolie coming out and sharing her story about what it is she was doing. The genetic counselor said to me, again, based on what they're seeing and how this is presenting and the information that we have, they felt comfortable with me going along that pathway. And it was fine for me. It worked. It was great. I mean, I moved forward with my life. I had kids. I have 3 daughters. And so, again, everything that I did always was in this light of, okay, you might have this genetic mutation. In 2021, I was ready to start having a baby. And at that point, actually, the genetic counselor and my doctors were both like, before you get pregnant with your third, you do need to have a mammogram and MRI with ultrasound. We know you haven't done it up until now, but you need to have a baseline before you now get pregnant with with your third. So I did, held off on even starting to try in order to get in for the screenings and diagnostics. Yeah, so I did get a baseline MRI with contrast and a mammogram in December of 2021. And then I got pregnant with my third daughter in the spring of 2022, and then had my third daughter in December of 2022. So I had my 3 children that I had wanted to have, again, breastfed, went through my life, still hadn't gotten tested, nothing. Was like, okay, business as usual. I have my baseline MRI with contrast. I have my mammogram. Next, we'll figure out what it is. And then in October 2023, my sister was diagnosed with breast cancer. So she was 32. And at that point, our family history drastically changed. So it went from this decade plus of no history of early onset breast cancer, typical risk, even though we had this high risk mutation, to something completely different. And this is too, my sister was, like I said, did get tested, knew she had the genetic mutation, and was doing surveillance every 6 months, and was still diagnosed at 32 with breast cancer, shortly after she stopped breastfeeding my nephew. That's when really everything changed. It was no longer this hypothetical situation of a high risk that you could have. It was oh my God, now I'm going to watch my sister go through all of this. We have this genetic mutation. I'm done having my children. My youngest was going to be a year in December. My goal with all three, if it had worked to breastfeed, was a year. So at that point, my doctor and my everyone was like, you can no longer wait. Like, you now need to know if you have this genetic mutation. And almost you don't have a choice. But it was also, for me, I was like, now I don't have a choice. Like, now this is the next steps that I have to take. I need to know for myself. I need to know for my children. And my OBGYN was like, it's more important now for you to know this, and we figure out what these next steps are going to be, than like for you to continue breastfeeding or any of these things. Now, I did make it to the year of breastfeeding. But so nice. I ended up, my sister was diagnosed October 2023. I ended up getting tested immediately, the genetic counselor, because I had her in my back pocket and I was always in contact. As soon as my sister was diagnosed, maybe that day or that week, I emailed her. I said, I need to get tested. Please send me the kit. 10 plus years later, it was such a different experience. She was like, sure, no problem. I'll send it to your house. It comes to you in the mail. All you have to do is spit in it. Then you put it in the envelope for FedEx, send it back out, and you'll get the results in a few weeks. So like, it went from 10 plus years ago when my sister and my mom were getting tested to this secret lab that they had to send it to it was a 1, 2, 3 and no skin off my back. It was so easy. The genetic counselor sent it to my house. I spit in the tube. I put it in my mailbox. And a couple weeks later, they called me and were like, yes, you are positive for this genetic mutation, which I had assumed I was positive. I was living under this assumption for all these years. I still, even when I got that final result, there was a piece of me that was, I mean, I don't remember. I think I maybe cried. I think I felt very, like, there was still this piece of me that was like, oh, I guess there was like a 1% part of me that was holding out hope that maybe I didn't have it, because it is 50-50. Not the case. So that was December of 2023. And then January 2024, I remember I stopped breastfeeding the night before I went in for my diagnostic MRI. Wow. So that I could get in with a breast surgeon. Got in with the breast surgeon and ended up having the prophylactic bilateral mastectomy and reconstruction in March of 2024. So I went over 10 years with not knowing and not doing anything, to within a span of 10 weeks, finding out I had this mutation and having this massive surgery.
Wow. What a whirlwind.
So that's what shifted it. My sister was diagnosed with breast cancer. So my family history drastically changed, and I wasn't gonna sit around and wait.
Yeah, absolutely. How's your sister doing today? Do you mind sharing?
Of course not. Oh my gosh, no. Thank you for asking. She's, thank God, doing amazing. She is in remission, but it was tough and it was not easy. And because she has this genetic mutation, she had to, it was a very aggressive form of breast cancer that she had, and she had to get everything thrown at her. So mastectomy, 12 rounds or 16 rounds of chemotherapy, 30 rounds of radiation, medically induced menopause. She did do a round of IVF between her surgery and chemo because I have a nephew. But so it was a lot. And even with those, there's a risk of recurrence. And even with everything, there's this risk of recurrence and this fear that is associated with it. And it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about these next generations of treatments and cancer vaccines and all of that, because I just see, we are grateful to have the treatments that we have now that keep us alive and the testing that we have to let us know that we have these genetic mutations and all of the progress that we've made to get where we are today. And it's not easy. There are so many side effects that come with all of these treatments. There's so many side effects that come along with, even me, somebody who's a healthy person, essentially amputated a piece of my body in order to reduce my risk of cancer.
Yeah.
And when I was weighing the pros and cons, I was like, which is worse, amputating a part of my body preventatively and then not having to go through all of the other things, or amputating part of my body when I am already diagnosed with cancer and then also having to go through all of the other things that come along with a diagnosis like that. It's one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about this work and cancer vaccines and what it is we are doing at Cancer Vaccine Coalition. And it happens to be, simultaneously with my whole story and journey and what we were doing was the first time that I learned about cancer vaccines and had heard about this. And so it was all kind of just happened. I feel like my life changed and did a complete 180 within 3 months.
Yeah, that's great though. I mean, you flipped that narrative right around and said, I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I'm going to be proactive and do something about it,
Yeah.
which is amazing and admirable for sure.
Well, thank you.
Well, let's talk about the Cancer Vaccine Coalition. You've been involved since early 2024.
Yep.
And if for listeners who may not be familiar, why don't you fill us in on the coalition's mission and how it's different from traditional cancer research efforts?
Like you mentioned, I have been involved since early 2024. So simultaneously with me going through all of this stuff, my sister getting a breast cancer diagnosis, me finding out I am positive for this genetic mutation, and then waiting for my diagnostic MRI results, because I am a journalist and former morning show producer and in the communication space. I always have the news on in the background. I always am watching TV, consuming news, things like that. So I had the Today Show on one morning in January, the end of January, and heard, as I was walking from my living room to the kitchen, like this voice on my TV being like, I'm leaving my dream job to start an organization for cancer vaccines and breast cancer vaccines as a breast cancer survivor. This is what I want to do and my next steps. And I was kind of like, rewind, like, I'm sorry, what? She just said on national TV, she's talking like, I'm like, breast cancer vaccines? What is she talking about? Like, I had never heard of this. And again, I just spent however many minutes you've been listening to this now talking about how I was very involved in this space as a patient and very informed, talked to my genetic counselors, talked to my doctors, was not uneducated in this space and had never once in my life heard of a cancer vaccine or a breast cancer vaccine. So I did what any producer would do. And I tracked down that voice and rewound the story. I was like, okay, what is the story? Let me see. Because I missed the actual piece that she had done. And I just heard her interview on the sofa. You know how after sometimes they do these, they do the live piece of the segment after you do the story with the researcher and the doctor and stuff. So I rewound it, listened to the whole story, got the name of the correspondent, which was Kristen, and found her on LinkedIn and a few other emails in a few other places and sent her a few emails and a LinkedIn message. And I was like, this is what's going on. This is who I am. I just saw your story. My sister's going through this. This is what we're going through. I would just love to know more about what these are. Not even about the organization, not about what you're doing. Like, what are these breast cancer vaccines and what is this that I need to know? And so she responded to me on LinkedIn, which I'm so grateful for.
And we're talking Kristen Dahlgren.
Yes, Kristen Dahlgren. So she is the founder and CEO of Cancer Vaccine Coalition. And she was a former Today Show correspondent and nightly news correspondent at NBC. And so Kristen responded to my LinkedIn message, which I'm so grateful for. We got on a call and just hit it off. And I was like, I will do anything and everything to help you and to be involved in this. I need to know more. Other people need to know about this. And in that initial phone call, she had actually said to me, there are clinical trials underway for patients who are BRCA positive. Would you be open or interested in learning more about it?
Whoa.
And at that point, I was like, no, because I had already, by the time we had talked and by the time I saw this story, I had already made up my mind that my only path forward was this now prophylactic mastectomy because of what my sister was going through. However, it really, really upset me that I didn't know about this before, because if you had asked me 2 years ago or 4 years ago or 6 years ago, would you be interested in maybe participating in one of these clinical trials? I would have 100% gotten myself tested and figured out what it was and seen maybe there was something that I could do to do it. One of the main reasons I did not get tested was because I saw no path forward for preventing or reducing my risk other than massive surgeries and massive impacts to my body, both internally and externally. Yeah. And I wasn't ready to face that or do that. If somebody had said, oh, here's something else that maybe you could do, or here's another path forward, been like, oh, okay, that one I could maybe get on board with, you know? And so these clinical trials that are underway that she was telling me about are for healthy BRCA positive patients. And so I'm not considered a healthy BRCA positive patient anymore because I had the surgery. So even though I haven't had cancer, I'm not eligible for one of these clinical trials because I don't have the breast tissue. So I'm not considered healthy in the sense of the clinical trial term. And so that was what really got me fired up. Was I was like, I've been in this space for 10 plus years. I'm a journalist. I've written stories about this. I've talked about it. Nobody has ever mentioned this. It took me happened to having something on the TV to be like, here's something. And Kristen was in a similar position where she was a breast cancer survivor and has gone through treatment and is a medical correspondent and has been at NBC News for 30 plus years. And she learned about cancer vaccines through reporting within the last 2-ish years, give or take. And so, no, that's what really got me going. And I was like, I'll do anything that you need. Like, sign me up. I am on board. And I ended up letting go of all of my other clients that I had through my communications agency business and volunteering full time all of 2024. So as soon as we started talking January 2024 until January 2025, where now I'm working with the team, I was a full-time volunteer.
Some serious commitment.
That's how passionate I am about
That's
it.
amazing.
And I think you asked what differentiates us. And I think it's we have a sole focus. We have a mission. We are focused on cancer vaccine research, accelerating that research, getting the data, getting the information so that we can get these treatments to patients faster. They can be here in the next 10-ish years, maybe even less, if you have the right awareness, if you have the right support, if you have the right funding, if we can get people into these clinical trials, and if people know about it. You can't get upset about something that you don't know exists.
Yes. You need to create that demand. And if people aren't aware of it, how is that going to drive the demand for this, for people to push more?
Exactly. So that's how we differ. A lot of other organizations are raising money for research and have some vaccine arms. We are solely focused on cancer vaccines and the next generation of cancer treatments. And that is the research that we are funding. We are funding it and focused on late stage research. So these are clinical trials right now that are for patients. So phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Humans are receiving these cancer vaccines. I have a friend who's gotten a breast cancer vaccine. She is in a phase 2 clinical trial right now for a breast cancer vaccine. These are real. It's happening now. It's not science fiction. And we need to raise awareness. We need to talk about it. We need to educate. We need to fund it. And we need to support the science and the researchers that are seeing such promising and amazing results so that we can get the data and the information that we need so that we can get these to patients, because they don't have time to wait. We don't have time to wait and sit around and see
That's right.
what if.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. It's so forward thinking, and it's a difficult time to be thinking when there's all of this kind of scaling back of medical research. It's I can imagine that's a bit of a struggle that you may be up against when the environment right now, but being at a time when there's not 100% focus, maybe pushing aside some of the moonshot project that was with the previous administration. Where is this falling, and what are some of the potential barriers or limitations maybe that you are facing? Like you said, we need awareness, we need to create the interest and demand and that sort of thing. So what are some of those barriers that you can speak to?
So honestly, we are so hopeful. And this is a time that I think there is such opportunity. And I think it is up to us to take action and look at what those opportunities are and what can we do to support those and fund those. One of the beauties of Cancer Vaccine Coalition is that we are an organization that is bringing together all of the researchers in the cancer vaccine space and the science, and breaking down these barriers and having doctors and researchers and scientists collaborate and help each other and say what it is they're seeing in their labs, and then across the country what you're seeing in a different lab, and bringing everybody, under one roof to work together and to collaborate so that we can move this forward. So we're able to support and raise awareness around the most promising research that is taking place. And we're raising money to do that so that we can have these, private public partnerships, I think, and utilizing what it is that we have at our disposal to keep the momentum going forward and to continue the progress and the research so that we don't see things come to a stop, because there's no need for it to come to a stop. We can continue to support the science and support the research. And, everybody we talk to is so excited about this and doesn't want cancer research to be impacted, and when I say everybody, I mean everybody, all levels, from the patient all the way up to Washington, D.C. The head of the NIH went on Fox News a couple of months ago and was talking about the excitement and the progress being seen with cancer vaccine research. It really is an opportunity, and we are really hopeful that this is a mission that we can all come together and push forward, because 1 in 2 of us will be impacted by cancer. You talk about barriers, and yes, change is not always easy, but the response and the excitement and the hope, that is really the hope that this is providing to people, and I see it every day, is just next level. It's an opportunity, I think, for us to all come together and collaborate and really push this progress forward. Yeah.
Well, so that concept of a cancer vaccine, it's it's always seemed out of reach, and you're sharing all of this hope and excitement that this can happen, hopefully sooner rather than later. But it could be a little confusing for people, and you've also referred to it as a treatment. So can you explain sort of the cancer vaccine overall? Like, I know you're a storyteller, not a scientist, but can we put it into terms maybe that we can understand, and then also referencing it as a treatment? So fill us in on that.
Yeah. Essentially, these are being utilized as a way to train and unlock our immune systems to recognize the cancer cells. And so, because we have such advanced technology now, and because we have more knowledge on what causes some of these cancers, or the neoantigens, or the proteins that you have to target, and some new and advanced information, doctors, from my understanding, and scientists are able to target what it is that's causing this cancer. And these vaccines unlock and train your immune system to recognize the cancer cells without targeting the healthy cells. So right now, chemotherapy, for example, kills off all fast-growing cells. Cancer is a fast-growing cell. It evades the immune system. It's tricky. These cancer vaccines are training your immune system to recognize the cancer cells without necessarily impacting the healthy cells. These are still being, like we said, in clinical trials. So we're not 100% sure how they're going to look and what exactly it is going to be. They will most likely be a polytherapy, so not necessarily the only thing that you utilize, but they become a tool in your toolbox for when you are either diagnosed with cancer, if you have already been diagnosed with cancer and gone through current standard of care treatment as a way to reduce your risk of recurrence, or, to target some of these genetic mutations or high risk populations. So in the simplest term, this teaches your immune system what to look out for.
I briefly remember coming across how the development of the COVID vaccines with the mRNA technology is something that may have helped, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one, it got people interested in using mRNA types of vaccines and that it could be used for cancer, like they're testing this from a cancer perspective. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, so they were using this technology for cancer vaccines before it was being utilized for this other group of vaccines. So yes, this technology has been being created and utilized, and there are a few different ways and a few different technologies. And Kristen is really good at explaining this side of things. But yes, it has been, and cancer vaccines have been in development for many years. We have talked to a patient who had a cancer was part of a breast cancer vaccine clinical trial 20 years ago.
Interesting.
Was given a 7% chance of survival. We talked to her a couple of months ago, and she has never had a recurrence. She has gone on and lived her life. She was told to go home and get her affairs in order. She had a 7% chance to survive. So this was late stage HER2 positive breast cancer, and 85% of the women who were a part of her clinical trial who received the optimal dosage of this breast cancer vaccine are still alive 10 plus years later.
Wow, that's
the
amazing.
Median survival age for what they were diagnosed with was 5 years. The median survival time, 5 years.
Wow.
10 plus years later, 85% of them are still alive.
It's amazing.
So this is stuff that's been happening, and we just, you can't unhear it.
Well, and likewise, when I came across Kristen, I think it was probably either on LinkedIn or, it was probably on LinkedIn. I think we initially came across this. Yeah. And you know how sometimes it will give you your recommended people to follow. And Kristen came up, and like the Cancer Vaccine Coalition, and then obviously that got me connected to you. And so obviously it piqued my interest as somebody who is a previvor and is open to, exploring the vaccine story. That is significant. I mean, this could be a game changer for so many of us that are facing these risks.
So many of us. I mean, it would be life-changing. For me personally, I have 3 daughters. They have a 50-50 chance of having this genetic mutation. In hindsight, knowing now what I know, do I wish maybe I had done something about it in 2013? Yeah, like having a prophylactic bilateral mastectomy, having any type of mastectomy is not fun. It's 0 out of 10 recommend, but better than the alternative.
Absolutely.
That's not how we should live. We should have the best of the best. It's 2025. We need these modernized standard of care treatments. And I need it for my daughters. I need it for my sister who has a high risk of recurrence. Like, if we can raise money and fund a vaccine trial for her subtype in a recurrence prevention, she would be, she'd be first in line. She has said, aside from the health of my family and my husband and my child and like our current health, there's nothing more that I would want than a cancer vaccine. like literally nothing more that she would want.
All right. Well, what progress or partnerships or things that you're most excited about within the organization right now?
So I think I'm just most excited about, what we're doing now, talking about it, raising awareness. We have funded the expansion in partnership with the V Foundation of a clinical trial where we've been able to increase the amount of recipients by over 50%. So that was our first grant that we've given out. We're really excited about that. And I think it's, working with all of these institutions and hospital systems and researchers and doctors. We bring them together, they share what's going on. When you listen to what it is these medical professionals and doctors and researchers are seeing and doing and the results, I mean, it is mind-blowing. I come to it from a storytelling perspective. So I'm learning the science, I'm learning the research, I'm learning all of this. And like I said, you cannot unhear it. You cannot unhear the excitement. I had an event for my community here in Baltimore a couple of weeks ago, and we had a oncologist talk about liver cancer vaccines that she's working on, and that in her clinical trial, there have been a handful of patients and that have gone from having a year to live and have been on hospice to 4 years later are still alive, have gone on to get married, are living their lives. And so you hear these things. I mean, it's this collaboration, it's having this hub, it's having an organization that we can see where the money's going, the research that's being done, the results are being made, the living proof that we can see people who have had these cancer vaccines and what's going on excites me so much. I mean, it's crazy and amazing. I mean, it makes me speechless almost, because I don't even know what else to say other than everybody I talk to has the same reaction. Like, oh my God, let's do this.
For sure. All right. Well, let's shift gears a little bit back to you and the work that you're doing. So your PR background gives you this rare perspectives on health stories and science and how it can reach the public. I mean, clearly the last year plus you have spent taking the Cancer Vaccine Coalition's story and personalizing it. I mean, clearly it resonated with me and caused me to reach out. What do you think, just in general terms, are some of the biggest challenges in communicating complex topics like this, right? Or like genetic risks or cancer vaccines? Like, what are some of those biggest challenges? And maybe people who are like advocates who struggle to communicate some of these complex ideas, how do they share their stories?
So I think health communications and sharing these complex ideas is always a challenge. And I think it is one of the biggest challenges for so many people, both advocates, organizations. I think that's, Kristen's secret sauce is sharing stories and disseminating information in a way that people can understand it. I think that's what drew me into the organization, was her and her infectious way of explaining this and talking about it. And so I try and really learn from her. And that, I think, figuring out, though, what the main point is that you want to talk about and repeating that point. I too struggle because I want to get out all of the information and I want to share so much, and I want to be like, and this is the science, and these are the antigens, and this is the complexities, and this is the definition of what this means. And at the end of the day, what is it that's going to resonate with somebody, and what is it that's going to make them want to listen? And I think communicating the most basic piece of the information without feeling like you need to get into the weeds with everything is so important, because I think for the majority of people, we're hooked with one piece of information. And it's probably a piece of information that the majority of us don't know. And so there's so much that we can talk about when it comes to cancer vaccines. There's so much we can talk about when it comes to genetic mutations and hereditary cancers and what you can do. But what is the biggest thing that we want people to hear? What's the biggest piece of information, and what's that feeling that we want to evoke? Because that'll be what hooks them in. And then once they're already in, then we can go down that rabbit hole of all of the other details and information and everything. Like, you don't want to overwhelm somebody with so much information before they're even hooked into what it is that you're doing. So I think it's leaning into the emotion, evoking a feeling, and honestly starting with, I think storytelling is the biggest tool that we can use. I mean, it's going to be much more motivational for somebody to listen to me and say, let me introduce you to one of my closest friends who has gotten a breast cancer vaccine. You're like, I'm sorry, what? Now I want to hear more. Like, you have put a face to this abstract concept. You hear her story, and then you want to know more about how it works. And then you get down to the nitty gritty and the detail. And so I think when it comes to health communications, that is the biggest struggle, is not getting stuck in the weeds with every piece of information that we want to share. And I've noticed I was much better at doing that before I became more knowledgeable about all the information and the science, because you want to share the science. The science is really cool. The research is really exciting. It's really awesome. It's really hard to understand, and it's super complex. I think probably the majority of people want to hear the story and want to see how it's going to impact them, what it means for them, hook them in that way, and then sprinkle out that information, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's sometimes a challenge of, advocates or people that are sharing their stories online. I had a question here that I was initially going to ask about, people not feeling overexposed by telling their stories potentially, because we're revealing some personal information. And I've always said not everybody needs to share all the details that we share on this podcast. But for those that are, what's some advice that you might give to those folks, or for those that are interested in being an advocate or being a storyteller online? What are ways that they can do that effectively?
So I think it's much harder to always share your story than it is to share other people's stories. And so I really still struggle with this. And I have a hard time knowing what pieces of information to share, what not to share. That's something that I'm working on, is, speaking in sound bites and not necessarily sharing every detail of everything. But I think it's a personal choice for everybody. And I have friends who are BRCA positive who have chosen to not tell anybody and not share anything. And they've gotten involved in some of the work that I'm doing and come at it from a different direction, and people still don't know their connection to it. And then you have somebody like me, who I'm an open book. And like I said, it's almost like hi, my name's Aliza, and this is who I am. I still struggle with it, though. And I think it's really hard to know what pieces of your story to share and what pieces of your story to tell, and when to do it and how to do it. Advice that I always get that I'm not great at doing for myself, but I'm going to now relay to everybody else, is to give yourself grace and to only share what you feel comfortable sharing. I think at the end of the day, it's a personal choice. Now, I will tell you, or I will say, that what I've noticed is, for myself, it's very healing and it's very therapeutic for me to talk about this. I know I mentioned at the very beginning, I have a lot of anxiety around health. I have a lot of, these are complex feelings. It's incredibly therapeutic for me personally to write about my story, to share what's going on, to talk about what's happening with other people, to have a community of other people who have gone through it. And I think it humanizes me in a way that people feel very comfortable. I notice that, like, a lot of times I'll start, and by the end of the conversation, they'll be telling me their whole life story as well. And so I think it's, finding that happy medium of what it is you feel comfortable having in the public and what you want to keep more private. And I think that you can do both. And I don't think that you need to share your entire story. I share a lot of my story. I'm sure there are probably subconsciously things that I keep private that I maybe haven't mentioned or that I haven't shared. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I'm sure there is. The other thing is, sometimes I feel like I'm being like self-centered, or like, do people really want to hear my story, or should I talk about myself? I think that's a lot of what people hear, or sometimes I get sick of hearing myself talk. But then if you step back and think about it, like, again, this is an opportunity to give somebody some information in a humanized way that's not clinical, that's not statistics, that could then help them move forward with something that may change their life. It's the same thing with Cancer Vaccine Coalition and, fundraising and using storytelling for that side of things. This is an opportunity for somebody to get involved in the future of cancer treatment and prevention and like what this next generation will be able to have thanks to what we are all doing right now. And so looking at it as a way, like coming to it from as an act of service almost, as opposed to this is my story and I'm just going to talk about myself, has been a reframe for me. And I have noticed, I have people who are I could name you a handful of people now off the top of my head who I know who have been sitting on their genetic mutation, haven't done anything, and have since had these prophylactic procedures or even just made appointments with doctors since I've had mine in March. Now, I don't think it's necessarily because of me. I think that this is something that people have been sitting on. I sat on it for 12 years and I heard people's stories and I saw different ways of going about it. But I think everything from being able to talk about the experience to being able to give doctor recommendations or me sharing my experience with my doctors or what that's been like. And it was helpful for me. I met friends, I met people in the 3 months or the 10 weeks of getting tested to making this decision. I talked to 2 or 3 people who shared the doctors that they went to and what their experience was and showed me their boobs if I wanted to see them, so that it was much more tangible and it made it much easier for me. And I've been able to do the same, I think, paying it forward to a few others. And I know they're now doing it to others. And so I just think I think the beauty of sharing your story is that you never know who out there is going through something similar and maybe doesn't have the support system to talk to about it. And sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger or somebody that you're not as close with about something.
Yeah. 100%. And you're right. When you take a step back and you realize I'm telling the story, my story, not for me, but for everybody else, it's gonna have an impact. You're absolutely right. It's great.
Yeah, it does.
So looking back on your journey from your eventually getting the BRCA1 testing to now becoming this vocal advocate for the cancer vaccine story, what has surprised you most about how your story's evolved in that time period? What surprised you?
I think my passion around it and my willingness to talk about this and face it head on. Again, I go back to this feeling of anxiety, and I know a lot of people have anxiety in life. And this is something that I always talked about before and I talk about now, but having health-related anxiety and then watching your sister go through cancer and you have to go through all this health stuff and having this fear of illness and then being inundated with it head on can be a lot. I think what surprised me the most is my willingness to take this now head on and no longer sort of live in that fear and more live in this realm of I am going to talk about it. Just because I talk about it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. But if I don't talk about it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to happen. I'm going to take action and I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure that what I have gone through and what my sister has gone through and what so many people around me have gone through maybe isn't what my daughters are going to have to go through. Or maybe isn't what we're going to have to go through in even 10, 15 years from now. In our lifetimes, we could see a change. Every treatment that we have right now for cancer started with this process, clinical trials, research, to then get to the patient. What we knew in 2013 when I first found out that I had this genetic mutation to what we know now is so drastically different. I can't even believe that it is the same genetic mutation and the same world that we live in. And that is less than 15 years. So look at how much we can do in 15 years when it comes to raising awareness, funding research, talking, sharing. I mean, my children are going to have such a different experience if they are positive for this genetic mutation than I had. And so I think that's the thing that's surprised me the most. And honestly, finding an organization that I am this passionate about. I have been in this for so many years, and there are so many organizations out there, and there hasn't been a ton for me personally that feels like it's really resonated in this, like, I don't want to say visceral way, but in this way that I was like, as soon as I heard Kristen's story on the Today Show, and this was 2024, I was like, this is the organization that I will be putting everything behind, both time, financially. I've seen over the years, people have events and do fundraisers and are volunteers and very passionate in all of these different types of organizations, both cancer research organizations, but other nonprofits. There hasn't been a single organization until this one that I will do literally anything and everything in order to like, come hell or high water, like, I am in this. And I think that's what surprised me the most, is finding something that I feel so passionate about. And I've been looking for years. I started my career as a journalist and a morning show producer, and then I left that to be a stay-at-home mom, and I loved doing that, and I was a stay-at-home mom. And then I got into print journalism and doing writing, and then I have like a communications background and PR, and had clients in that space, and thought maybe it was the parenting space. I've been looking, I think, forever for something that I feel so passionate about, that I'm like, this is my purpose. This is my mission. Like, this is what I need to do. I will put my name behind this, and put my name behind Kristen and Cancer Vaccine Coalition, like, all the way. And everything I do, I think I now have in that frame and that mindset of like, this is the reason. Like, this is why my grandmother found out on a fluke that we have this BRCA genetic mutation. This is why I went through these like 10 plus years of trying to figure out what it was I was going to do, and my journey, and how I could help people, or what it would look like. It sounds so silly, but even I say I did my life almost reverse. I feel like my generation, so many people like have gone through their careers and then had children later in life. I had my children really young and pretty early in life. And now I'm building up this side of myself as well. I think this is why, like, that was the journey that I went on. But I think that's what surprised me the most, is finding something that I'm so passionate about, that allows me to be so involved, so excited, and make a difference while also being home with my kids. They understand it. They tell their friends, oh, there's a cancer vaccine. And my daughter wrote us for her writing workshop class last year. They had to do like, what do you think the world will look like in the year 2070? And
Wow.
medical innovations, and there will be a breast cancer vaccine because this is what it looks like. And she did all this research on it. And I'm
That's
like,
amazing.
great.
I love that. And you're right. You went through that journey so that your kids could experience that joy with you and that progress. And maybe one of them will end up going into science or research because of the work that you're doing today. Wouldn't that be amazing?
It would be amazing. I hope so. Or, yeah, or public health, or nonprofit. Yeah. So
That's great. If you could leave our listeners with one message about either taking control of their health like you did, or supporting innovative research, what are some things that they can take away from our chat today?
You can take a few things that I would love people to be able to take away is to make sure that whatever decision that you're making, or whatever way you're going, you're doing it with the guidance and advice of the people you trust. So those who are in your trusted network, whether that's your doctors, your families, genetic counselors, whoever it is that you feel is your sounding board, you're making the decisions that work best for you based on the information that you are getting. There's a lot of outside noise out there, so it's really hard to not feel like maybe you're making the wrong choice or the right choice. And I think at the end of the day, this is just a personal choice that you have to make for yourself. I think be open what people have to say to you. And I think people have strong opinions. And I know that I have really strong opinions for my sister, and I share those opinions because I don't want to ever feel as though I'm holding something back and not giving her every piece of information that she has. But at the end of the day, it's a decision she's going to have to make for herself. These are decisions that I had to make for myself. Try not to regret the decision that you make. There is no right or wrong, I don't think. And hindsight is 2020. Again, if I knew in 2013 what I know today, my decision would have looked very different and my journey would have looked very different. That's okay. I feel guilty. I do, a little guilty. I've actually never said that out loud. So breaking news here. I do. I feel a little guilty that I maybe didn't do something sooner and didn't find out, or maybe chose this. But I did it with the information that I had at the moment. And that's what I think is so exciting about progress, is that, you know, in 2013, I wouldn't have necessarily been able to make the same choices that I would want to if I had found out now, because I wouldn't have been able to, because we didn't have the same information that we have now. We didn't have the same technology that we have now. We didn't have the same resources that we have now. And that's what happens as we progress and move forward. And that's the same with cancer vaccines and these new generations of treatments. Like, what we have today is different than what we had 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So we need to keep it going, and we need to do it at an accelerated rate. We need science to keep up with technology so that we can get these to patients faster. So I think those would be the things. Make the decision for yourself, but do it based on knowledge and information. And everybody says knowledge is power, and I agree with that. And I still think I made my decision based on knowledge, and it just wasn't the same decision that I think other people necessarily have made. And the knowledge that I had was my anxiety, my family history, what was best for where I was, the landscape of what the world looked like then in terms of this mutation. And for me, that knowledge made me feel empowered to choose not to get tested, as opposed to maybe some other knowledge where sometimes people have said to me, well, of course you would want to know that you have this genetic mutation, because knowledge is power. And like, if you have that power and you know that you have it, you can do something about it. I think the fact that it runs in my family was knowledge enough for me, because the truth is, they will treat you as everybody at this point, I think, assumes you're positive until proven negative. Yeah. And so I think that also is the beauty, though, of knowing, like, for my sister, who's super young, when she felt a lump, there was no waiting. There was no saying, oh, it's just this. There was nothing. Like, she had that knowledge and she was able to get into these 1, 2, 3, like, we're not messing around type. I would have been able to do the same thing. If I, God forbid, felt a lump, I would be able to say the BRCA mutation runs in my family. I don't know if I'm positive or not, but it runs in my family. And I would have gotten in 1, 2, 3 also, even if I didn't.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
so
for sure.
So making those educated choices for yourself, not regretting what it is that you decide. So yeah, what I want people to leave with: making educated choices that work best for you and the phase of life that you are in, not regretting your choices. And if you do feel guilty about it, acknowledging that hindsight's 2020 and you may have made a different choice if you had information that you had, but that's not how life or the world works. And finding something that you feel gives you purpose within the landscape of what it is that you are in, whether it is sharing your story, whether it's volunteering for an organization, whether it's starting a podcast, something that makes you feel fulfilled and that feels healing for you within this greater landscape.
Mm-hmm. If you can share where we can learn about you specifically first, because I know you have content out there as well, and then obviously the Cancer Vaccine Coalition.
Yeah, so Cancer Vaccine Coalition is Instagram at Cancer Vaccine Coalition. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn. Our website is cancervaccinecoalition.org. So raise money for awareness, research, education within the cancer vaccine space. You can find me on Instagram too, at Aliza Friedlander. I don't put up a ton of content out there because, as I said, I'm not great at sharing my own story. I'm really good at sharing other people's stories, but I'm really good one-on-one. I love talking. I love networking. I love answering any questions. Email me, Aliza at cancervaccinecoalition.org. DM me on Instagram. My cell phone number is in my signature.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you being here. And if you are not one, like you said, to share your own story, that you share it for others, I appreciate you coming here and sharing your story with
Thank you. I'm trying to
my
get
audience.
better at it. No, I'm trying to get better at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your story and helping us understand this incredible work that the Cancer Vaccine Coalition is doing, this perspective that you provided us today. And, as somebody who has lived this experience, it helps us shape that conversation around prevention, which is ultimately what we're trying to accomplish, is helping people know that there are means out there for prevention. It really highlights how powerful awareness and innovation, science and research, which my audience knows I talk a lot about that, and building that awareness around where people can find credible resources is key as well. So I love it when all of those things come together. And I think the story that you shared here and the work that the Cancer Vaccine Coalition is doing also accomplishes that. So for everyone listening, I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling both hopeful but curious as well about what's ahead for cancer vaccines, cancer prevention, and research. So you can learn more at the Cancer Vaccine Coalition. We'll have all of the links that we've mentioned in the show notes. Until next time, remember, your story matters, and sharing it can help spark somebody else and help them find their strength.
Thank you for spending time with me on the Positive Gene podcast. Your support means everything. If you found value in today's episode, I would be so grateful if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast. It truly makes a difference. For an in-depth look and links to resources discussed today, check out the accompanying blog on my website at sarakavanagh.com.